And Becky's brother and his family are over from Australia. Becky's brother's obviously from here. He's got a Belgian wife and 3 Australian children, and they arrived here during the week, and we were with them on Thursday on St. Patrick's Day, spending the day with them. And where they had come from, it was the end of their summer. And so they had left 38 degrees in Perth. Now, none of us would love 30-something degrees right now. Sure, we wouldn't. They had left the sort of 30 to 38 degrees Celsius in Perth. And over 24 hours had flown here, and so we were with them the next day. And for us, it was a day like this. The sun was shining. It was about 4 degrees, and we were loving it. You know what I mean? Like in Northern Ireland, that is like as close to summer as you're going to get at this time of year. And so we were loving it. We were saying, this is fantastic. This is amazing. And you'd have thought we had put them in the middle of Siberia, the way they were dressed up with 6 or 7 layers on them. They were freezing. They were absolutely freezing. They couldn't understand how we were finding it so pleasant. And I discovered something, that you can have 2 people in the same place, but they're experiencing different seasons at the same time. You can have 2 people in the same physical location, but one's experiencing summer and one's experiencing the depths of winter. And it's the same in any group like this. It's the same in any place. We're all in the same physical place, but some of us are experiencing a different season than somebody else. Some of us here, it's your summer. You're loving life. Life couldn't be better. Your relationships are great. Your marriage is great. Your job's great. And we all love you for that. You know, we all bless you for that. Sometimes as Christians, we kind of feel like something's always got to be wrong. We're kind of like Christian hypochondriacs. Remember the old ad used to be on Doctor, can I have a prescription? You know, sometimes as Christians, we go, no, if you're having a blessed season, that is wonderful. That's fantastic. We are so pleased. But I'm also very aware that some of us aren't in summer. We're in winter. Some of us are finding life difficult right now. Maybe in your job, maybe in your family, maybe in your health, maybe in your home, maybe in your finances, maybe a difficult relational situation, just some place where there's stress and tension. And even if you are in a good season now, the reality is we all go through dry places. We all go through difficult places. We all go through wilderness places. We all go through those places where there's a little bit of barrenness. And so this morning I want to ask ourselves, how do we navigate through that? How do we find our way through that? And so my message is called Direction in Dry Places. Direction in Dry Places. And I want to look at a passage that I've never preached on before, but I felt drawn to it this week in 1 Kings 17. Let's read verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite. I love that. Elijah the Tishbite. What's a Tishbite? Well, it tells us from Tishbe, where's that? In Gilead, glad you asked, said to Ahab, as long as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. And so we have this introduction to the great prophet Elijah. Everyone will have heard of him, the most famous prophet in the Old Testament. This is where he steps onto the stage. But he does it without much introduction. He does it without any fanfare. There's no genealogy. There's no lineage. It just tells us that Elijah is a Tishbite from Tishbe. Now, even scholars today cannot figure out where Tishbe is. It's one of those places that's just not on the map. It would be like me telling you take the back road from Tandragee to Scarva and turn right and then turn left halfway through and you'll end up in, Glibbigomuk. And the people in Glibbigomuk know where Glibbigomuk is, but the rest of us have no idea. Tishbe was, if you're from Glibbigomuk, bless you. But Tishbe was one of those places. In other words, it was an obscure place. It was an unknown place. It was somewhere that wasn't particularly exciting or popular, didn't even have a spar. But he makes quite the splash because look where he goes. It says he goes to Ahab. Now, Ahab was the king of Israel at that time. After David and then Solomon, Israel had been in this place of decline. There had been 8 kings and each one had been progressively worse. And Ahab was the worst of all, not only because of his own sinful heart and sinful actions, but because of who he had married. Because it's important who you marry. That's just a freebie as an aside. Think about, choose carefully who you marry. And he chose a woman called Jezebel. Lovely woman, not. She was everything that God didn't want for his people. She was a foreigner. She worshipped pagan gods. We don't know if he actually liked her. She was a Phoenician. We don't know if the girls were prettier in Phoenicia, or if it was a political sort of expediency thing. But he married Jezebel, and Jezebel was a fanatical pagan God worshipper. And so over time, she began to push God, Yahweh's prophets, to the side. In fact, she did more than push them to the side. She began to slaughter them. She began to move the worship of Yahweh out of the way. And she promoted strongly the worship of Baal, who was the god of fertility, and his female counterpart, Asherah. And the people just went along with it. People just complied because it was too costly not to comply. Everyone else was doing it. And also, actually, their God was easier to serve. I mean, they didn't have all these commandments that God had given them, like the 10 Commandments. They could kind of just do pleasurable things, sensual things, sexual things, whatever they wanted. And that was kind of where their worship went. And so the people just kind of went along with it. And as they did, the culture went more and more downhill, and darkness became the new normal. And so they drifted further and further from who God had called them to be. And that can happen in a nation, and that can happen in a church. And I believe that's what we're seeing in our own nation, in the Western world right now. That for centuries we built our lives on laws. We weren't Christian countries, but we built our lives on the 10 Commandments, and the laws were built around that. And there was a respect for God. And as we have drifted further and further from that, we have seen darkness become the new normal. And when that happens, God lifts his blessing and his protection off a nation, and all sorts of unwanted things begin to happen. And then Elijah arrives on the scene from the sticks. Rugged, rough, uncouth, undomesticated, not known as P's and Q's, probably fairly uneducated, but he has a message from God. And that's what we find in times of great upheaval and turmoil, in times of great fear. There's always somebody, there's always a group of people, there's always a remnant that God preserves. There's always somebody who hasn't bowed the knee to Baal. There's always someone who hasn't complied with the culture. There's always a group of people who have said, we will worship the Lord our God. We will obey his word, no matter what our culture says. Our culture might say that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man, but we believe that the word of God says he created them male and female. Our culture might say that any love is real love. The word of God says something different. Our culture might say, do whatever you want, and if it feels good, it must be all right. The word of God says, no, your life is made for the glory of God. And there's always a remnant, there's always a people, there's always somebody who will declare the truth in a corrupt and dark generation. And in this situation, it is a guy called Elijah. And so Elijah goes to Ahab, and look at what he says. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. That sounds quite balchy, doesn't it? Until I say so, there's not going to be dew or rain on the land. Where did he get his confidence? Where did he get his courage? Where did he get such audacity and boldness? It was his time with God. It was his time with God. Elijah was a man who knew his God. Even his name means my God is God. Yahweh is God. Jehovah is the Lord. He was brought up, obviously, in a good home, but he had a personal relationship with his God, because we read this in the book of James later on. Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. He was a human being just like us, but he had a spiritual power and authority that he found on his knees before the throne of God. Those who are intimate with God in private will not be intimidated by man in public. Those who fear the Lord above all else will fear no man. And Elijah was a man who knew his God. And so he was able to step up to a king who could have cut off his head with boldness and say to him, at my word, there will be no rain until I say so. Because he saw Ahab on the throne, but he knew there was a higher throne. He saw the king of Israel, but he knew that that king, like every other king and every other ruler, is temporary and provisional. But there is a Lord of heaven and earth who reigns for all eternity. And earthly kings and earthly rulers and earthly presidents and earthly prime ministers come and go, but the Lord Almighty rules forever. And so that is where he found his boldness. That is where he found his confidence. That is where he found his courage. How did he get away with it? They were killing the prophets at this time. You know what I think? I think they just didn't take him seriously. He was a nobody from nowhere. And he comes and he says, there's not going to be any rain except at my word. And they're like, yeah, right, away you go. Get him out of here. I really think that's what happened until a week or two later when the rain stops. And suddenly Ahab's thinking, who was that funny wee fella who told us that there was going to be no rain? I wonder, is he something to do with this? Why did he stop the rain? What was the point in that when he could have judged them in any other way? Because Baal and Asherah were the gods of fertility and they were worshipped to provide rain on the land. And so God goes directly after the idols of the people. God targets the worship of the idols, the things that they were trusting in instead of him. And he says, you think Baal can give you rain on your land? Just watch what I can do. And God will do that in our lives at times. He will target the places where we have idols. And I know you hopefully don't have little statues at home that you bow down to, little Buddhas on your fireplace that you rub the belly and make 3 wishes or whatever that is. I hope you don't. That's what, when I'm talking about idols, that's what we tend to think about. But an idol is simply anything in your heart that comes before God. Anything that you turn to before you turn to God. Anything that's more important in your life than God. Anywhere where you find solace. Anywhere where you find peace outside of God. And when we put something before God, sometimes God will go after that idol because he wants you to know that he is the only place that you can find hope. He is the only place where you can find true peace. He is the only place where you can find true supply. He is your source. And so Elijah declares there's going to be no rain until he says so. And look at the next few verses 2 and 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. And so God speaks to Elijah and says, I want you to go and hide. I want you to go to the Kerith ravine and hide. And if this would have been today, I know what Elijah might have said. He might have said, God, I'm just getting my ministry started. Can you not see? I'm kind of a big deal around here. Like people are starting to get t-shirts printed with the rain stopper on it. Like I've got a ministry. TBN, God TV are looking me to do an interview. I've got an Instagram account. I've got a Facebook account. I've got a YouTube account. Like, God, this is a good time for me. Why are you taking me out of it? That's what would happen today. But God says, no, I want you to go and hide. And actually, he spends the next 3 years in hiding. And I have discovered this in my own life, and I've discovered it in many people's lives, that very often God will call us into a season of hiddenness. He will call us into a season of obscurity, even isolation, where it feels like maybe we're forgotten about, where it feels like our relationships aren't as close as they used to be, where it feels like we're just hidden. It feels like nobody really cares. God will sometimes take us away from the noise and the crowd and the busyness of life, and he will hide us for a season. And he tells him to go to a brook called Kerith. And the word Kerith literally means to cut off or to cut away. And he was being cut off from other people, but there was something else going on. I think God wanted to cut away some things from Elijah's life. God had so much more for him in the future. He would call down fire from heaven. He would raise the dead. He would do all sorts of wonderful things. But before he could do that, there were some things in his heart and in his life that needed cut away. And that was going to happen in obscurity and in the hidden place. And sometimes in our own lives, there's things that God needs to cut away. There's things that we attach ourselves to, things that we allow into our lives. And God says, I have so much I want for you. I have placed so much potential in your heart. But you need to cut this away. You need to remove this. I can't do this if you keep hold of this. And so God is using the isolation, the hiding, the wilderness to prepare him. But there's something else God is doing here. God is using it to protect him. God is using it to protect him because God knows that once the drought comes, there will be people who will be looking Elijah's head. There will be a bounty on his head. And so God brings him into hiding because God has more for him in the future. And if he's found now, he won't be able to do the things in the future that God wants him to do. And sometimes God brings us into a season of isolation, of wilderness, a dry place, a place of obscurity, not to hurt us, but to protect us. Sometimes God holds us back from something we want to protect us. Sometimes God will stop you getting that job that you think you deserve because he's protecting you. Sometimes God will keep you out of that relationship that you so desperately want because he's protecting you. Sometimes God will stop you in your tracks. And it feels like there's a delay. It feels like he's forgotten about you. It feels like everything's coming against you. But maybe he's doing it to protect you. Because he can see further than you can. And he knows the harm that might come to you down there. And it's really difficult at the time. But sometimes as we look back, we say, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, that I didn't get that. Thank you, Lord, that I didn't go there. Thank you, Lord, because you protected me. You see, it's very difficult at the time, and we can feel like God has forgotten about us. But the truth is this, that just because you're not visible doesn't mean you're not valuable. Just because you can't be seen by people doesn't mean you can't be seen by God. When you go on holidays to Tenerife or wherever it is, and you're logging into, or you're checking into your hotel or apartments, they always ask you, do you want a safe? Do you want the safe? And I don't know about you, I say no, and then I go down an hour later and I always give them the euros for the safe because of so much important stuff. And what do you put in the safe? I mean, do you put your crisps and your, and your salt? No, you put your valuables. You put your valuables. You put your passport. You put your money, whatever, your jewelry. Whenever you go out, you put your iPad, whatever it is, you put it in the safe because you're trying to keep it protected. And sometimes God will put us away, not to hurt us, but to protect us. He puts us in a safe place because we're so valuable to him. And it can feel like we're overlooked. It can feel like we're forgotten when actually he's protected us. He's preserving us because we're so valuable to him. And so maybe right now you feel like you're invisible, you feel like you're overlooked, you feel like everyone's advancing apart from you. You feel left on the shelf because all your friends are getting married and having kids and you're still single. I want to say to you today, God has not rejected you. God has not forgotten about you. God is protecting you. God is preparing you. God knows where you are. And God will be faithful to you. Just because you're not visible doesn't mean you're not valuable. Look at the next verse. Look at just how specific God is in his care for Elijah. Verse 4. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. I love this. God says, go to this place. I already have provision for you there. God has all of his needs taken care of. See, they're about to enter a drought. They're about to enter a famine. If there's no rain, there's no crops. If there's no crops, there's no animals. And God says, I see what you're going to need even before you need it. And I have provision prepared for you in this place. And I just felt like the Lord wanted to say to some of you today, I know what you need. I know what you need. I see your need. I see the emptiness. I see the lack. I see the barrenness, wherever that is in your life. And he says, I know your need. And I have provision for you for that need. And God sends him to a specific brook, the brook Kerith. Why? Because there's going to be a drought. And so he sends him to a place flowing with fresh water where he can drink every day. What about food? How will he eat? God's already got that taken care of too. Look at what he says. I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. Just a few things I want you to see here that I think are important. Number one, there's times, where God gives us a choice. And whether you do A or B. Maybe you have 2 jobs and you're saying, Lord, which one do you want me to take? And God says, you know what? You choose. I'll bless you in both of them. There's 2 opportunities. God says, you know what? You choose. And there's definitely times like that. We look at the life of Abraham. God just sends him out, doesn't tell him where he's going, just says, I'm going to bless you wherever you go. See that in the life of Joseph, wherever he was, the favor of the Lord was upon. So there's definitely times when God says, you know what? Anywhere you go, as long as you're within the parameters of my word, I will bless you. But then there's other times when God is incredibly intentional and specific and precise about where he places us. There's times when he is very clear that this is where I want you to go. And this is one of those times. He tells Elijah, I have instructed the ravens to supply food for you there. It says there. Where? At the Kerith ravine. In other words, every day, I love this, every day ravens were going to come to the Kerith ravine and drop off food. It was the original Deliveroo, twice a day. I love that. And look at it was meat and bread, steak sandwiches twice a day, folks. That is my dream right there. I could have lived there forever and ever. Amen. Thank the Lord he didn't say, I'm going to send you tofu or one of those food substitutes. He sends him steak and bread every day. But he sends it to a very specific place. He says, I will send you food at the Kerith ravine. What if Elijah had said, I hear what you're saying, but I quite like the other ravine down the street. The food was still going to be at the Kerith ravine. And it would have spoiled, and Elijah would have starved. And what I'm saying is this, that there are times in our lives when God gives us just a choice, and there's other times where he says, I'm very specific. You go here. This is where I want you to go. This is where I've provided resource. This is where I've provided food. This is where I've provided nourishment. This is where I've provided blessing. This is where I've provided provision. This is where I've provided protection. That his provision is conditional. It's there and there only. And I have seen people ignore that direction from God and they wonder why their lives are barren and empty because they didn't do what God told them to do. They thought they knew better because the blessing and provision of God was there. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. But for some of you, will find that God is very clear at times. That you might want a job in this company, but God says, I want you to go to that company. And you think, but that company is so much more prestigious. My family will be so much more impressed. And God says, I don't care. I want you to go there. It could be about not taking a job. God can be very specific in that at times. I remember a number of years ago, before I came here, there was another church where a job came up. And on paper, it was perfect. It was something that I wanted. I had people calling me almost every day telling me to apply for it. The people in the church were telling me to apply for it. And when I went before the Lord, he said, you're not to apply for that job. He made it so clear. And sometimes God will do that. He'll be very specific and very clear about some part of your life. Maybe it's about a person that you get into friendship with or relationship with. God can be very clear and go, I don't want you to do that. That's the person I want you to connect with. That's the person I want you to spend time with. It could be all sorts of things. But when you go to the place where God has called you to go and do what God has called you to do, you will find provision there. But what I love about this is this. God used both natural and supernatural means to provide for Elijah. God used natural means, the brook. The brook was just a river. It was a little stream. Just had always been there. It was a very natural way to provide for him. But he also used supernatural means. The meals on wheels twice a day arrived from heaven in the mouth of a raven. Dropped the meat, dropped the bread. Supernatural provision. And it's the same in our own lives. God will provide for us through natural means. And he will provide for us through supernatural means. But here's the danger sometimes in churches like ours. Churches where we emphasize more the gifts and the Holy Spirit and those sorts of things. Is that we come to depend much more on supernatural means than natural means. If I had £1 for every person who has said to me, God told me to, and they tell the next statement is, and I go, oh, God did not tell you to do that. Like, I know he didn't. You just wanted to. Or somebody comes to me and they say, you preached on something and this is what you said, and so I left my job. And I go, and what are you doing now? Nothing. I haven't been able to get another job. And they look at me like it's your fault. And I go, one, I don't think I said that. And two, you interpreted it in a way, obviously, that you wanted to begin with. You see, you can have a pure heart and an empty head sometimes. Sorry to be direct, but I've been at the brunt of this so often, and I have seen it so many times. There is the very rare occasion when God will tell you to leave something, leave a job without something on the other side. It is very rare, and he will confirm it again and again. There will be angels river dancing on your duvet. You will get other people, random people telling you this is what God... So sometimes when God will tell you to do that, but most often than not, God will tell you to stay where you are until he opens something else up. Yes, he can provide supernaturally. We have seen that, and we have wonderful stories of God's supernatural provision in our lives. Financially, in different ways, with houses, with different things, with jobs, we have seen God's supernatural provision in our lives. But can I tell you that as much as we have seen his supernatural provision, I have been working since I was 16. I started off in Woolworths, stole the pick and mix. It's closed now. It doesn't matter. Then went to Wellworths across the road. Didn't steal anything. Didn't last long enough to steal anything in there. Then went to Dunn's. Then went to British Home Stores. Then went to the Levi's store. 4 out of 5 are closed now, but that's nothing to do with me. But I've worked for 30 years. So yes, I have seen God's supernatural provision. But the biggest way God has provided for me is through me working day in and day out. And if you can't work this, I'm not having a go at you. What I am having a go at is Christians who are so hyper-spiritual that they think work is beneath them and that the Lord will provide. And what they normally mean is, I'll ask other Christians to give me money. You know, things like GoFundMe are wonderful, but the next GoFundMe I see for someone to go on a missions trip to Hawaii and they're raising £10,000, I don't want to give you money for a holiday. Go to Galway. I'll give you money to go there. Oh, but the Lord's calling me to Hawaii. He's calling me to Hawaii too. Okay, give me £10,000. I will go there tomorrow. Go fund yourself. Sorry, I'm getting carried away here. But sometimes we are too spiritual for our own good. God, yes, he does provide supernaturally, and that's incredible. But that is not the norm. The norm is that you do what you can do and trust God to do what only he can do. And Elijah went to the river. That was the natural provision. He obeyed God, and when he was there, he also received the supernatural provision. And the last thing I want to say about this verse before I move on is this. Don't reject the food because you don't like the way it's delivered. That would be like you walking into McDonald's and going, I don't like the look of that 17-year-old serving behind the counter. Let's go somewhere else. Don't reject what God sends just because you don't like how he sends it or who he sends it through. Because what I've discovered is God will very often provide through people that I might not have chosen. God isn't as picky as some of us. He uses people, and sometimes he calls us to places that we wouldn't want him to call us to or to use. But don't reject the package that he sends because you don't like the packaging that it's in. You know, God sends a raven. A raven is a dirty, unclean animal, particularly to the Jews. I would have preferred an eagle, or even a pigeon, a budgie even. You know, anything apart from a dirty old raven. They were scavengers. They feasted on carcasses. They were dirty. They were unclean. And yet the raven was the means that God used to bring meat and bread to Elijah every day for a year. If Elijah had been picky and choosy, he would have starved. And what I'm saying to you is sometimes God will send you whatever you need. That could be all sorts of things through somebody or through a means that you don't even like. But don't reject the provision because you don't like the packaging that it comes in. That can apply to your job. Like I say, one just looks better than the other one. It's a nicer company, fancier title, but actually you know God's calling you this one. Don't reject it because the packaging isn't as nice. It could be in relationships. Girls who have a list of 20 things that their man has to have before they'll date them. And he's only got 18 of them. He's not over 6 foot and he's got ginger hair and you're like, no way. All right, that was too far. The height thing, okay. But no, sorry. But sometimes God will send us what we need most, not what we want most. And he will send it in a way that we don't always like. But his provision sometimes comes in packages that we wouldn't prefer. You know, I lived in America for 2 years in my early 20s. And I went to a church there. And it was Reformed Baptist. Now, I know we have a couple of recovering Baptists in the congregation here. There's a support group on a Tuesday night, Baptists Anonymous, BA. Try Reformed Baptist. It's a whole other level of dryness. 2 years I went there. And can I tell you, the worship was dry. Like, dry. Like, if you raised your hands, the whole church just looked at you. Like you were, what do you want? Like, it was dry. And I kept wanting to go somewhere else. I kept trying to go somewhere else, but I kept going back. You know why? Because I was fed there. There was a preacher called Alistair Begg there who preached the word every week, morning and night. And that's where I was fed. And so as much as I kept trying to go somewhere with livelier music or whatever, I kept going back there because I was fed there. And I didn't like some of the packaging. Everybody wore chinos and polo shirts, and that was just the women. And it was dry, but the word was preached and I was nourished. And I kept going back there. Don't reject the provision of God because you don't like some things about the packaging. Let's keep going, we're nearly done. Verse 7 to 9. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain on the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, that's to Elijah. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So Elijah stays at this brook, Kerith, for a year, but then we're told the brook dried up. The brook dried up. The water stopped flowing the way it used to flow. The place that had been his resource and replenishment for a year, the place of his supply, started to dry up. And that'll happen in our lives at times. God will bring us to a place, he'll bring us to a job, he'll bring us into a friendship, and it's wonderful for a while, but there comes a time sometimes when it dries up. The job that you used to love and the job that you prayed for 5 years ago, you now hate Sunday nights because you know you've got to go there on a Monday. The brook's starting to dry up. That friend that you used to meet every Friday afternoon for coffee and you were so energized and you loved it, now half an hour with them and you need to go home and lie in a dark room for 2 hours. The brook has dried up. It can even happen in church things. A place where you used to serve and you loved it. And now you just hate it. And you feel guilty because you feel obligated. Or even at church. You know, we've all stayed in churches way past the expiry date. Let's just be honest. Out of loyalty, all of that. We've all done, I've done it, okay? We thought we could change things. But it dried up. But we kept staying. There's sometimes when God dries the place up. And the drying up is often a sign that it's time to move on. When you've been in a place where there's been good relationships, when there's been honor, when there's been respect, but suddenly everybody has been antagonistic towards you. Maybe the brook's drying up. But what I would say is this: when that happens, in most cases, don't immediately jump ship. Wait until God redirects you somewhere else. You see, the brook dried up, but Elijah didn't do a thing until he heard a word from God. The brook dried up, and Elijah didn't go, well, I guess I'd better start finding another brook. He stayed where he was until God spoke to him and told him where he was to go next. And that's what we need to do. We need to pray and let God redirect us into a new place of provision. Don't make hasty decisions. Don't storm out. Don't rush away. Use wisdom, discernment, advice from others. But ultimately, we go to God and say, God, this seems to be drying up. Is there something else that you're trying to tell me here? Is there somewhere that you're leading me here? And it won't always be clear cut. But what I'm saying is, as soon as something goes wrong somewhere, don't overreact and immediately jump ship. As soon as you find something you don't like, or as soon as there's a little bit of opposition or obstacle, don't just assume, well, that's dried up, and start going somewhere else. Sometimes God doesn't want to make your circumstances easier. He wants to make you stronger. Sometimes God doesn't want to take you out of difficult circumstances. He wants you to endure and persevere so that you're strengthened and deepened in that place. So don't immediately go, well, it's dried up, I'm moving on. Say, Lord, what are you doing here? What's going on here? Why is this dried up? Is there something you're trying to say to me? The brook dried up, but Elijah waited in clear instructions. And then God told him specifically where to go next. He says, I want you to go to a place called Zarephath, and there's a widow there, and I will provide for you through her. In other words, before God releases him from this place, God releases him from this place and moves him to a new place. And very often that's how it'll happen. If God has called you to a place, if God has called you to a position, if God has called you somewhere, he will release you from it, and he will open a door somewhere else for you to go there. Not always, but the vast majority of the time. He will release you, and then he will open a door somewhere else for you to go into. And it's so important that we understand that God initiates things, but God also ends things. He begins things and he closes things. He opens doors and he closes doors. He leads you in and he leads you out. And he's very specific with Elijah, tells him exactly where he wants him to go. To a widow, not the best place. Widows didn't have a lot of money. To Zarephath, not the best place. That's roughly where Jezebel was from. But in that place, God provides everything he needs for the next 2 years. And when you're in the place where God wants you to be, doing the thing God wants you to do, he will provide for you. Whatever that means. And provision can come in all sorts of ways. When you're in the place where God wants you to be, doing what God wants you to do, he will provide for you. Psalm 37 says this: I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging for bread. What he's saying is, I have seen God provide every step of the way. Some people say God's will, God's bill. I wouldn't put it just like that, maybe. But what I would say is this, that obedience always brings blessing. Obedience always brings blessing of some form into your life. If your heart's desire is to be obedient to him, he will provide for you. At times it will get tight. At times it will be tough. At times it will come down to the wire. But our God will provide for you. We have seen this as a church. As a church that's 6 years old, whatever, 7 years old now. This church, we have seen God provide every step of the way. He has been so faithful as we have sought to obey him. And we have seen it in our own lives. And we've seen it so many ways and so many times. And I was thinking through different ways. And I remembered a silly little incident that happened, but I thought it was as I finish up here, I thought it was just a quirky way that God provided for us. You know, we spent a year up on the north coast when we left Dublin, 2016, 2017. And when we moved there, we rented a house and we could only get it for 6 months because they wanted then to rent it out for the summer. weekly. And so we rented a house, and it was great, and we loved it. But the landlord said to us, we need you out by the end of March, 1st of April at the latest. And we had this strong sense that we were only going to be there for another 6 months after that. The problem was twofold. One, it's incredibly difficult to rent a house for 6 months. Everybody wants a 1-year lease. And two, this was Easter. And everybody wants to rent their house on a weekly basis because you can make the same rent in 1 week as you can make in 1 month. But we had to get out of the house we were in. And so we had to find another house, and it was getting difficult, and it was coming down to the wire. I remember this one came up at the other side of Coleraine, the Limavady side of Coleraine. And we went to look at it, and it was like down these country roads in the middle of nowhere. And we drove into it, and all I can describe it as is as a drug den. I mean, I don't know if it was, but it looked like a drug kingpin sort of house. It was this big house in the middle of nowhere that was sort of derelict. I mean, if you'd have dug up the garden, you'd have found something. And there were more security cameras than there are at a PSNI station. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was something just off about that house. And we knew it definitely wasn't the one for us. And we left disappointed because we were getting to a few days before we needed to be out of the house we were in. And we're in the driveway, and I get into the car, and the estate agent winds down the window, and she says, you know, there's another house that is just coming onto the market for rental. It would suit you guys absolutely perfectly. It's in Port Stewart. It's just been fixed up. It's clean. It's fresh. It would suit you perfect. And I said, but why? She said, oh, he will only rent it for a year. I said, we've only got 6 months because we really believed that was all we had left there. She went, oh, it's a pity because he'll only rent it for a year. I said, that's okay. She said, it's a real shame because it's a perfect house for you. Lovely big garden at the back. There's a view of the sea. I mean, if you crick your neck, there was a view of the sea, but sea view, you know, the old estate agent thing, you know, sea view, yeah, if you're sitting on the roof. See, you know, and I said, that sounds perfect to us. She said, yeah, it's a shame, but he'll only rent it for a year. He's been very clear about that. And she said, you know, I've got the key here with me today. If you want to go and see it. I said, I would love to see it. But we can only rent for 6 months. She went, that's no good. He'll only rent for a year. Now, I went to clown her, but even I knew something was going on at this stage, okay, that was a bit funny. So eventually, after about 4 or 5 of this, I just went, you know what, why don't we go and see it? And she went, you know, we'll only rent for a year. I said, let's go and see it. And we went to see it, and we walked around it, and it was exactly what we were looking for. And you could see the view if you cricked your neck. And it was exactly what we were looking for. And we came out and she said, what do you think? And we said, this is exactly what we want. And she said, it's a shame he'll only rent it for a year. And I said, that is a shame. And I said, we would love this. And I said, how much is it? And it was right at the top end of our budget, but we could do it. I said, we would love this. She said, yeah. She said, he'll only rent it for a year. I said, here's what I want you to do. Will you phone him and tell him that there's a couple here, a young family who want to rent it for 6 months, and we'll give them 2 months' notice if we're going to move out before a year's up. But we only think we're going to be here 6 months. She went, oh, he'll not do that. He'll not. He's been very strict, very firm. It's going to be a year. I said, just phone him. She phones me back an hour later. I don't know what's going on here. You've got the house for 6 months. And we moved in on the 1st of April. And 6 months to the day later, we started here. And my point is simply this. God knows your needs. God knows your needs. And that might be a house, that might be a relationship, that might be a job, that might be finances, that might be healing. God knows your needs. And if your heart is to be where he wants you to be, and if your heart is to do what he wants you to do, he will meet your needs. So how do you find direction in a dry season? you go to God and you listen to God and you do what he says in his word and you do what he speaks to you. And as you do that, you will find protection, you will find preparation, and you will find provision because he knows your needs. And I want to pray now. Would you pray with me? I want to pray for those right now who have a need in some part of your life. And maybe nobody knows about it. But I simply want to say that the Lord knows about it. And maybe you're in the room here, maybe you're at home watching online. I just want to say that the Lord knows your need. And would you turn to him? And would you say to him, Lord, what do you want me to do? How are you going to meet this need? And it might be natural. He might give you a natural thing to do like he did with Elijah, go to the brook. Or it might be supernatural. But as you're obedient, as you do what he instructs you to do, as you obey his word, he will meet your need. And I want to pray for those who feel like they're in a wilderness, who feel like they're in a long winter at the minute, who feel like just so weary. I want to pray that the Lord would refresh you, that the Lord would sustain you, that the Lord would strengthen you, that the Lord would lead you out of the wilderness, that you would know his nourishment, that you would know his goodness, that you would know his provision. And I just pray the blessing, protection, favor, provision, and goodness and healing of the Lord over every area of your life right now. Every area. Amen. Amen. Let's stand together. Let's worship God as we close our service.